150 years ago, 200 years ago, when Canada was formed, the provinces were formed, we were primarily a rural country, pre-country. 85% of Canadians now live in urban areas. The question is, why does our mayor have to go in short pants up to Queen's Park to ask for things? I would suggest to you that the fundamental problem with all of this discussion, all of the decisions they're trying to make today, comes back to who makes those decisions. While I understand that to become a province is going to be a major undertaking, there needs to be a better relationship between provincial government and cities, between cities and the federal government. Ask yourself, and it's easily, you can find this information out, how much money comes out of Toronto to the province, to the federal government, in taxes, in fees, in revenues, versus how much comes back to Toronto in what is commonly referred to as transfers from both the federal and provincial government. Some of the revenue tools they've talked about recently are like trying to pay for your Starbucks, your Tim Hortons with nickels and dimes. There's three revenue tools that would fundamentally change the way things are done in Toronto, would fund state of good repair, to social housing, to transit, to everything else. But and Peter Wallace did mention the three of them, did list them, we don't have control over them. A city sales tax, a corporate income tax, and an individual income tax. By their estimations, those three items at reasonable amounts would bring in about $1.5 billion in Toronto's revenues a year. Leverage that 6 times, which is the typical way you borrow against. It's $9 billion a year into the city's coffers. What could you do with $9 billion? 2.5 Shepherd extensions, the LRT complete system, social housing paid for, not just the state of good repair, but new. And yet we can't make that decision by ourselves. Toronto needs a better relationship. Ottawa, Montreal, Vancouver, Calgary need a better relationship with their provinces and the federal government. How do we do that? You get up to Queen's Park and you lobby. You get everyone in Toronto. You lay out what this could actually mean to Toronto taxpayers.
1 minute.
Thank you. You tell them, here's the possibilities. Let 2.8 million people in Toronto write to their MPP, write to their MP, and say, we want a better relationship. I think if people in Toronto understood how much money flows out of this city, what we do for the rest of the province, the rest of the country, Toronto is an important part of what Canada's economy is about. We should be adults now and make those decisions. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We now open the floor to the judges for questions.
Thank you. So that's a very interesting idea. Have you done any research? Does this city-state concept exist as a model elsewhere? Have you looked at this in North America or?
Okay. I won't go back 2,000 years to the city-states of Athens and in Greece. That's how democracy started. Democracy started as city-states because that was the fundamental, the way life was organized was as city-states when democracy started. Europe has any number of examples of city-states within the Federation. Germany does that. There's a number of other cities like that. In North America, there aren't. It's federal government, provincial or state government, and then cities. Because again, think about when all these legislation, when this was first thought of 200 years ago. Cities were a lot smaller, a lot different than they were provincially or federally. But are there examples? Absolutely. Is there legislation that we could use from other parts of the world? Singapore, prime example. There is a city country, more than just a city state. So there is ample examples that we could draw on. We're not reinventing a wheel. We'd be putting a Toronto coat of paint on it, but we wouldn't have to reinvent. Sir.
Yeah, it's a tremendously good idea. The problem, as I understand it, was, and you said that, is when the legislation was built originally about what Toronto controls and what, the province got most of its money from rural places that didn't come from Toronto. And so what's happened as the finances have changed over time from the rural being the big places to the city, the basic underlying relationship has never changed because they don't want to give up their money, that's all. And how do you get them to give up their money?
I think it's a case of whether it's giving up the money or giving up control, as you rightly say. Toronto has 25 ridings. I'm the founder of the Green Party of Toronto, a municipal political party. So what if we had a Toronto party that ran candidates in Toronto in the 25 ridings and elected 20 people to Queen's Park? You'd have to work the change from within. But I think that there's, as you say, when provinces were first created, revenue was rural. They didn't have a financial sector, services sector like they do in Toronto, which is probably the biggest generator of revenue in the city. So it's not an easy decision, but I think what it may do is prompt that discussion that says, why do we have the OMB making decisions for Toronto planning? Why do we have to go to Queen's Park to ask for money for transit that Toronto needs? And then Ontario has to turn around and say, well, if we're giving $1 billion to Toronto, we need to be fair and give some money to Hamilton, to Windsor, to Peterborough, to wherever else. Surely we should be able to make those decisions ourselves with a certain amount of control. We don't want a runaway city. But I think it starts that process to that more equivalent relationship.
Thank you. That's all the time we have for questions.
Oh, come on. I've got one question.
Okay, one more. Let's make it quick.
So, would you envision Toronto taking on additional responsibilities for services with this increase in taxes that we have available to us?
I think you have to have that discussion. I mean, it has to. If you're going to be responsible for Toronto, you have to be responsible for Toronto. We have the 401 being the responsibility of the province. We have the Don Valley being the responsibility of the city. Surely it would make more sense if we had responsibility for all of the roads within Toronto and we could do planning accordingly. So absolutely. I think if you're going to say, you can't cherry pick. You can't say, we just want the good stuff. We want to make sure that, again, we have that adult conversation and that we're responsible for what we do. It's like my house. I'm responsible for my house and my gardens and my sidewalk. I can't ask my neighbors to come and plow my driveway just because it's not something I like to do. You got to be responsible for everything in your city.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
$1 of every 2 of our taxes are spent on healthcare. I understand in Ontario it's around $55 billion. That's, I think, an obscene number. And if we could trim the fat there, we could actually fund all of our other desires. This would be like a pilot program idea in Toronto. And like anything, we know to create change, it usually takes a couple of things to happen to work in synergy to actually see results. So one of the, several different things, but we need to have, we operate still in an honor system where doctors and dentists can have a private business and draw from the well. And we need to have doctors and dentists as salaried people that are government employees. And we have an online system where every time you see a doctor or dentist for any reason, you have to fill out an online form. It's digital. And doctors receive their salary based on number of patients seen, patient outcomes, patient feedback. You get a rating system which changes regularly. We also have to have digital cameras in every hospital or treatment room because that makes people stand up a little straighter and they're less likely to double or triple dip OHIP if somebody is watching or someone can, watch obtain a camera. recording. We can't have rich kids with store-bought grades, I say that with love, being shuffled through a system that don't actually have any passion for the profession, taking over mom or dad's practice. They then don't have any, they don't understand why they aren't very good at it, and I just think that we should be training our future doctors through the military, Canadian military, and that will also weed out people that are just in it for the money or for the narcissism of the title. I also think that we should have healthcare police in the same way we have transit police, somebody that you can call for an intervention, or an elderly parent that must go for a test, or if a doctor maims you, or we've heard so much about sexual assault in the Toronto Star, God bless them. So we definitely need to have that. And we also have to see that doctors have bias too. They are capable of having racist or biased feelings and thoughts, and we just can't have anyone that can affect another human being or touch another human being's body not being treated or tested for that bias like we do police. And also for finding specialists, I think the whole system is absolutely ridiculous. Airbnb, we could use the same interface and algorithm to find a specialist. Where, based on that rating system and your location, that's how you would find somebody. They would just, go online and also mandatory update courses. How can we have a doctor or dentist that has their knowledge base from 40 years ago when things were done completely different, compete with a young new graduate with a wealth of information? It shouldn't be a roll of the dice when you go to a doctor's office or a dentist's office what the outcome will be.
1 minute.
So health is wealth. People need to be in mint condition to take care of family and loved ones. Less strain on disability and related services and other, going on unemployment and so forth. And we need to revolutionize these changes. This is what Canada sells themselves to the rest of the world, that, we have the health care. But the health care has to be good. It can't be that we are independent from the World Health Organization and self-governing ourselves, because that's what we do with every other area in our society, and that clearly isn't working. So thank you.
Thank you. Questions? We'll have John David first.
Specifically, you're suggesting a lot of things.
Right, but they have to work in synergy. Mm-hmm. Can't be just one.
I should tell you that I used to be a physician in Sunnybrook. And
sorry to get your back up.
Your complaints are absolutely correct.
Yes.
I also used to work at the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota.
Yes.
So I experienced the U.S. and the Canadian, and yes. I won't call it a system because neither one of them are systems.
Right. Excellent. Right.
The biggest problem that I see in this country,
right,
and the biggest problem in the United States is that
yes.
in places where the American doctors are paid a salary with no bonuses, works the best.
Yes.
The moment
yes.
you start
yes.
doing fee-for-service, they're only concerned about getting you in and out of the office.
That's right.
And one of the problems, which is a global problem,
yes.
is it usually means the doctors prescribe things in a hurry, mostly antibiotics,
yes.
that shouldn't be
yes.
done.
Yeah.
And it makes the antibiotic less useful when we have to use it.
Right. Yeah.
The other problem that's a huge problem with Ontario,
yeah.
I tried to get this done with Mr. Smitherman. I used to call him Mr. Slitherman, but is the delay in our system. I tried to get them to do what the Mayo does, which is you pay a specialist to be on the phone
right.
a morning, a week or something.
Right.
So that the family doctor doesn't have to write out a big explanation,
right.
doesn't have to wait until the specialist secretary looks at it, doesn't have to wait for other tests, doesn't have to wait. So the Ontario system, if you want to call it that, is the biggest problem is magical thinking, and this is how it works.
Yeah.
From the time the family doctor thinks there's a problem to the time the specialists actually see and make a decision, the magic is nothing has happened to the person or the disease in that time delay.
Right.
And
Yeah.
no one ever seems to yell about that or scream about that.
No.
And it's very simply solved by paying somebody to be on the phone. But I've never got anywhere with anybody over those issues.
Yeah.
So just a
The
reminder,
call-
we have 2 minutes for questions left.
Yeah,
Sorry.
you need a question for her.
Tom?
So would you be suggesting that through these synergies we could reduce the spending on healthcare and we can free up that money for other city services?
I think that probably we'd see about 10 to 15% doctors walk out of ego, but let them walk. Where will they go? The U.S., let them have them. They'll come right back. You want to go to the Europe? If they speak the language, okay, but let them walk. And the thing is, we'll weed out the ones that are in it just for the money and that are the double and triple dippers, and we'll have a lean system where people understand that you go into this profession because you want to heal a human, and you deserve to have a decent living making it, and that the superstars that are really vested interest, that they make the big salaries, and yeah, I think that you'd save billions, and you could redirect that money wherever you like. But I think for sure savings. And for a camera, we have what is the cost of a digital camera running 24/7? We have a camera in the Home Depot facing a paint can. We don't have it facing the humans. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Thank you for your input. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I've been doing some volunteer work with the city and United Way on the poverty reduction strategy. And one of the issues that my personal issue is that Toronto is experiencing a housing crisis, which we've been hearing a lot about in the news. My idea is that we need to invest in the housing. We need to remove people who are dying on our streets from the streets. And my idea to improve that would be to look at Toronto community housing for available apartments, because apparently there is a lot of available apartments in the city, and try to take some people out of the shelters. We're also hearing that the shelters are not in livable standards, not meeting livable standards for its residents. So we could place people in those available apartments, take the shelters one at a time, clean them up, revitalize, restore, do whatever we need to do, and then take the people off the streets and place them in the shelters and improve our housing system overall.
Thank you. Adina?
Yeah, so thank you for that. Absolutely true. Where do you see the money coming to do that?
That's something that is not going to generate revenue for the city, obviously. The city has to find the money somewhere from their social assistance programs. It's part of the social assistance program, I guess, and they have the city has to find the money to invest, because one of my experiences is that I partnered with Commitment to Community, and we did a poverty reduction discussion out in one of the neighborhood apartments somewhere out in the East End, and we find people calling themselves society's rejects, and I feel that where we live has something to do with respecting us as human beings. So it's respecting human beings and giving us a decent place to live. And nobody in our city should feel like society's rejects. And so I personally think the city has the money to do it. It's just that people are not taking the initiative. For example, tonight there's going to be a sleepover at the mayor's house to report, to show an example of these people who are living on the streets, living and dying on our streets.
Thank you. Are you willing to pay more money to help get people off the street?
You mean
yourself,
like in
personally?
taxes?
Yeah.
I'm unemployed, but I'm doing the work. So we need to get people involved who have the money to invest, of course.
Just one question for everybody sitting here. Hands up. How many people are willing to pay a little more to get people off the street? Okay. Well done. Good. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we still have more questions.
I have one more question, sorry.
We have a few more questions. Sorry, Riley.
Thanks for your presentation. Can you just quickly touch on who needs to be on board for this to happen?
Actually, so I am also involved with the city on the strong neighborhood strategy through the local champions pilot. So the city does have a Toronto First Community Housing Advisory Committee. So through the Toronto Strong Neighborhood strategy, you can get in touch with the tenants First Advisory Committee, and there would be people there who are already living in these buildings who would be willing to take on the work, I'm pretty sure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything?
John David, do you have a question?
We're all aware of most of these problems cost money. We're also aware of the Ontario government about to make some changes in housing sales and taxes. And what I've seen over the years is that money that comes from those things, where does it go? It should be earmarked absolutely for what you need. It shouldn't go in the coffers to fill potholes. It should go from collecting money because of housing issues to the people who need housing. But in the past, that's never happened. That money has always gone into fixing a bridge someplace. And I don't know how we stop that.
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with the monies not being invested where it is needed, and we need to pay some attention to that. The City Council should be paying attention to that.
Do we have time?
Yeah, we still have time.
I have a
One more question.
So you mentioned the money not being invested where it's needed. Is there a place that you see?
Sometimes.
Is there a place you see where we could pull money from to reallocate to housing?
Perhaps the police force. I think they collect a big portion of our city funding. Am I correct on that? Absolutely. Yeah, I think so. Like, we don't need police driving up and down the street and looking for people to give a ticket just because you park, and you park there because you're attending a social justice event, and they're giving you a ticket like for. I think there's some ways to review the whole police system, how it works, and we could make some cuts there.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did you want to pass? Okay. That's it. So up next, we'll have Michael Polani, please.
Good afternoon. Thank you for 4 minutes.
Thank you.
Great. So I guess I couldn't come up with a catchy name, but what mine's really about is I just put make city taxes fair. And I guess what this is about is I think you look at the City of Toronto and you see increasingly one of the most unequal cities in Canada, even North America. I think rising poverty, the highest level of poverty amongst large Canadian cities, and we haven't really incorporated that, I think, into our discussion about revenues and taxes in the city. So we kind of have this discussion, should taxes be higher or should they be lower? But I guess my idea would be to consider the equity impacts of the various taxes and fees in the city and think about ways to make taxes more equitable. So, I mean, just by example, if you look at where we collect money from, property tax is really a flat tax, right? It's a flat percentage of the value of your property on the residential side, right? So if you look at what people pay, lower income homeowners actually pay a higher percentage of their income than higher income residents. So even though, if you have a big house, you pay slightly more, that's not, you don't pay quite as much to make up for your increased income. So property tax is kind of a regressive tax. We see service or user fees TTC fares going up. Again, those are kind of regressive taxes. Many modest income people ride transit. They're paying more and more for transit. Modest income people are paying more and more for recreation programs. And then even if you look at the imbalance between homeowners and tenants, the multi-residential rate of taxation, as you know, is higher than for private residences. So there are a lot of inequalities in the system. We don't seem to be getting information about what the burden of taxes, municipal taxes and fees are on people of different incomes. We need that information. And so I would say, my idea is let's get the information about the burden on people of different income levels. Let's explore ways to make all fees and property taxes more progressive so they contribute to a more equal city rather than contributing to a more unequal city with more poverty. That's it.
Thank you, Michael. We'll have Adina with the first question.
Yeah, so Michael, that's really great. Can you just tell us why it hasn't been done and what's the obstacle of doing it that way? It sounds good.
I think we've seen again and again that for politicians, they're very afraid of increasing property taxes. So they're looking for excuses not to, because there are vocal constituents, and they are often homeowners, and they see their property tax bill and it's whatever, $4,000, and they have to pay a check for $4,000, and it's not really that much on a home that's valued $800,000, but it feels like a lot, and so there's often a pushback about increasing property tax. But I think that if the discussion is framed about making property tax fairer, and there are some programs that provide property tax relief to lower income people. Let's make those programs better, and let's stop saying we can't raise property tax at all because there's a segment of the population that can't afford to pay more. Let's find a way to ensure that the property taxes are paid by people who can afford to pay a bit more, the homeowners who can, and I think that's the majority.
Do you have any ideas about how that would happen?
How it would happen?
Yeah.
I mean, on the property tax side, it's not that complicated. It would be a small change to the City of Toronto Act. Right now, the city can charge different rates of taxation on commercial and industrial properties. It would just simply be a small wording change that would allow them to do that on the residential side as well. So technically, it's not that difficult. It would require provincial approval.
You know about land transfer tax?
Yes.
Who gets the money
Who gets the money? Well,
for land transfer tax?
land transfer tax goes into general revenue, as far as I know. Is that correct?
Yeah, what's interesting to me is I have a family connection with a real estate company, and land transfer tax stays constant at $2 million. It's 2.5% of the house transfer tax at $2 million.
Right.
There is no increase beyond that.
Beyond 2 million.
And Toronto is full of houses that are 5 million, 10 million, 20 million,
Yes.
30 million. And I think there should be a luxury tax
I would agree.
on those houses.
On the land
But
transfer
the
tax.
city has never looked at that.
Yeah, that's a good suggestion as well. Make the land transfer
And
tax more
again,
progressive.
how do we ensure that that money actually goes to the people who need housing and doesn't go to fix potholes?
Well, the poverty reduction strategy, one of the aspects of that was a dedicated funding for the strategy, and
Yes.
the city hasn't done that yet, but I think that would be really important as well.
Thank you very much. That was great.
Any other questions? No? Thank you very much. McGillivray to present his idea.
Hello, thank you. Awesome. Yeah, I would say mine is kind of an amalgamation on some of the things that have been spoken to before. Poverty, of course, mental health, people with addictions, all that sort of thing. They, we often see them in the streets, freaking out, doing all kinds of crazy things, whatever. They need help because they're people. And so my one sort of plan is to have some sort of city donated chunk of land somewhere, potentially brownfields converted, which is a brownfield is a ex-industrial spot that's basically an abandoned chunk of land that's sold very cheap, converted and restored into some kind of farmland where people teamed up with something like CAMH or other sectors like that can bring people who have troubles, etc., to run essentially some kind of very large cooperative farming system and make it for profit so that those people have a share in it and they can actually have something tangible to build off of for a livelihood or something to that effect. And the food, of course, could be sold locally. It's good for the environment, etc. And talking about healthcare, of course, as far as poverty reduction and all that sort of thing, all these issues are related. An ounce of prevention is worth more than a pound of cure. So to say, are you willing to pay more for something, which, you know, I would agree that's a valid statement, but at the same time, not paying for certain things is going to cost us much more money in the long run, i.e. Police, hospital beds, etc., for those types of people who are essentially being unhealthy, mentally, physically, any of those things are tax burdens. People who cannot afford to eat nutritious food are completely disregarded as far as ability to compete mentally, emotionally, everything in society's workplace. Basically, they cannot, function if you don't have the correct nutrition. So somehow all those things would basically tie together. There's people, statistically speaking, for every bracket level of income that goes up, people have less and less health problems and live longer. Basically, that's statistically proven time and time over. And if you address those root causes at the bottom, that would cause a massive ripple effect in saving dollars down the road and essentially immediately, where people are prescribed so many things that are completely unnecessary when all they need is access to fresh fruits, vegetables, produce, etc. And that's sort of the gist of one of my ideas. Another one potentially is a lawn tax, taxing lawns. If you want to have a nice big green lawn that's going to eat away gasoline and pollute the environment, well, you're going to have to pay for it. And so basically tax that somehow and just suggest, the city already kind of provides alternatives that say, like, if you want to consult us for a garden that is, sustainable, etc., wildflowers, you can do that and make that some sort of system. And I'll just leave it at that for now. And as far as income inequality, that's due to inflation, and inflation is a whole other topic in the economy that no one really, I would say, understands, but it's pretty serious and eventually it's not a good thing. But anyway, that's a topic for another time, so thank you, and that's about it.
Thank you, Ian. We'll have Tom with the first question.
So you would like the city to take a larger role in mental health and healthcare, it sounds like?
Yeah, I would say definitely those things are related. Giving those people who are at the so-called bottom end of the totem pole what someone else was speaking to before, that they say they're street people or undesirable people, whatever, that, they have some stake in society because that's what makes people sane. It helps people believe that they'll be able to contribute and feel welcomed, accepted, etc., and something to offer, basically. And people don't like freebies, believe it or not. I would say a lot of people underestimate that people have dignity, and if you just give them things, they necessarily don't want to take it. They will if they have no other choice, but they want to have their own valuable, contribution to society because that's what we need to do. So,
thank you. Riley?
So just to clarify about the city-owned piece of land, so that would be like a place where people can go and get help and then also like do some farming and give back to their community as well?
Yes, something to that effect. Like one sort of thing that I thought about. There's tons of foreign workers coming into the country to, drive. They're taking planes 5-10 hours away to, land in Toronto and go work 2 hours away outside of the city. Why are there not some kind of groups organizing people who could be doing those things locally and supporting those people immediately instead of looking to, places super far away where, it's not one versus the other, but it makes more sense in all ways, I would say, to take a local, approach to solving issues like that as far as agriculture, not slave labor, but as well as developing some kind of farming cooperative. There's all kinds of environmental nonprofits that would, I'm sure, enjoy that sort of project to take on. So,
Thank you.
Afternoon, everybody. I'm sure you are well aware that everyone has one of these called a smartphone. Okay? What we have also in the city right now is a plethora of what I call generational divides, and they can all be brought together with this. So I came up with an idea with my nephew, just on a whim. He was doing a project for school, and I termed it Grandkids on Demand. So there would be a listing through Google Maps where they would be assigned an area of the city to partner with a high school aged kid, i.e. my nephew, to help seniors do everyday chores that they could not do either because they had barriers to accessing grocery stores, markets, or they just didn't have the time because they had doctor's appointments and other responsibilities that clouded their daily schedule. This could be easily done by partnering with not-for-profits. There's a not-for-profit in my riding in York Center called Unison. They're right next door to a high school called Northview Heights. Every high schooler I know of today has to do 30 hours of community service to graduate. Thank you, Mr. Harris. I was the first generation that had to do that. But the problem is the kids today, like my nephew and my niece, they don't know what they want to do. They don't feel like they're engaged. They don't feel like their passions are being recognized by the establishments. This would be one way to break down all those walls and to unite two segments of the population that otherwise would never interact with each other. And this would be also part of public engagement. And I would address this to the Civic Innovation Office, because this would be an innovative way of engaging youth and also getting their civic engagement IQ up a few scores. Thanks.
Thank you.
You know that one of the high schools has been doing this for a long time.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it's not going on I want this on a grander scale.
Yes, you're quite right about that. Do you have any ideas about how come it hasn't been exported to other wards, other areas?
I guess it's just a barrier of people don't know how to start it, or they don't know how to start the movement. So like one of the things we would get over that with is using Google Guides and Google Maps.
Good idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Riley?
So you're proposing that this be like a city program
Yes.
and they partner with nonprofits? in the city?
Nonprofits, student organizations, and also the not-for-profit movement. So like OCAP, student coalitions.
Any other? Tom?
So I don't know if you're aware, but Toronto has a senior strategy that is currently being looked at for stage 2.
Okay.
Would you suggest that this go in
Yes.
that strategy?
Absolutely. Because I feel like I've already done the beta test. In 1 year, I've got my mother cutting the cord with Bell. My mother has a cell phone. My mother doesn't watch cable. And that's all because I'm part of Generation Squeezed. I'm still living at home. And they're living the same level of life and the same quality of life that I am, just because I'm still there. Thank you.
Questions? Thank you.
Because you want to make people vested in their society, give them a piece of that society, and we see that people who own their own homes have healthier, happier, more successful lives in our city. So we should be giving everybody the opportunity to have a home in the city, a home of their own, right? That is the North American dream, in a sense, right? So when we have a tax that's punitive on people buying homes, especially first-time buyers, right, which most of them are coming to the table with only 5% of the money they need to buy the home, right? Then they have to pay 4% to the government in the land transfer tax. Now, that's creating a huge problem for affordability for these young people to get to the down payment, right? Meanwhile, the vendor sells the house, he walks away with his $1 million. You know, thank you, great city. And meanwhile, most of them have been paying their property taxes, have been assessed on $500,000. They sell their house for $1 million. And you're like, dude, you haven't been paying your property taxes really for the last 15 years. So now you're going to pay this land transfer tax, and you're going to shoulder that burden so that the young people can buy the house and get into the home, right? And you've been successful in this city. You've made a ton of money. And you're the one that's got the windfall. So why aren't you giving a little bit back to the city that's given you such a wonderful life and such a wonderful retirement nest egg? The city also needs to push this on the province, because right now we have this imbalance in our housing industry where people who buy houses in the suburbs so they don't have to pay the land transfer tax. So they save those 2 points right away, and they go out there and then they expect us, them to build them a train. Well, I need a train, or I'm going to drive in downtown Toronto, or I don't want a toll, right? It's because I went out into the suburbs to buy the house because it was 2% less because I could afford it and it was cheaper out there anyway, right? So we're actually promoting people to move into the suburbs, which is really not what we should be doing. We shouldn't be promoting people to leave our city. We should be promoting them to stay in our city. And that's why this simple concept, which is very doable, it's a very simple thing to balance it out and say, look, now we're going to shoulder, everybody in the transaction is going to shoulder the burden, not just the purchaser. Both the purchaser and the vendor are going to shoulder the burden of this transaction. And I think it's a very fair and equitable way. It's not going to change the amount of money the city gets in. It's not going to increase the tax. It's just going to balance it among the players in the transaction, which makes it more fair. That's it.
Thank you. Adina?
Okay, so what you're saying, this 4% land transfer tax that is now paid by a buyer.
Yeah.
So what you're suggesting is 2% should be by the buyer and 2% by the seller?
Well, right now is that you pay 4%. 2% is the provincial portion and 2% is the municipal portion. When David Miller put the tax in place, he just piggybacked it on top of the provincial land transfer tax.
So what is the
My
person
idea is
who's
to
selling?
change the municipal.
Who's selling? What is the seller paying?
Takes on the tax and burden.
Not the buyer.
No, hang on. The seller takes on the municipal portion, and the provincial portion stays with the purchaser. So he's paying 2 instead of 4%, and the other person in the transaction is paying 2. So it's balanced.
Gotcha.
Right now it's like this. Right?
Thank you.
Any other questions? You mentioned the land transfer tax before, so you must say something now.
My question is, most people don't buy houses, they buy mortgages. And how about some of the burden of the land transfer tax going to the company that's making a fortune on the interest rate on the...
I know this can be simply done because it's a municipal thing. I mean, you're saying, okay, let's rearrange the whole way that it's structured. I got an idea for that, but I'm only allowed one, right? So if you want, it's called the Fair Share Housing Plan. It's where the city, become the bank of mom and dad. Because right now, the only people that can afford to buy housing in the city of Toronto are people that are financed by their parents, right? And we're creating a demographic social time bomb here that people who live in rentals, kids can't afford to buy. So they're stuck in this cycle of poverty where they can't get a leg up and they can't get out from behind the rent. Right? And we need people to have that hope. And yes, they're buying a mortgage, but after 25 years, you get to burn the thing, and it's yours. And that's how I got to own my own home. That's how I have time to be here today, because I own my own home. And I don't have to go to work on a Saturday to pay the rent. Right? And that's how we get happy and healthy people. I mean, George Bailey said it. You want them living in Potter's Fields or you want them living in Bailey Park? And I mean, basically, and we are the savings and loan. And we should be helping people to get the homes they need.
Good point.
Tom, we still have one more question. Sorry.
I have one more question.
I was so good at that, I thought I'd bolt right.
So housing has been in the news recently, and there's been a lot of talk about not having enough supply in Toronto. Do you think that, and like this logic might not make sense, but by making it easier for people to purchase houses, we'll have even more purchasers, and that might actually drive housing prices up further?
Well, the balancing act of doing this will bring a little bit initially supply to the market, but I think the government, and that's phase 2 of it, the fair housing thing, where right now the affordability is a huge issue because the people who literally, and I'm in the housing industry, I build houses, the people who build them, whose hands are on them, can't afford to buy them anymore. And you have a crisis there when the cops in Toronto can't afford to buy a house in Toronto, when the firemen in Toronto can't afford to buy a house in Toronto, got a big problem, right? Like they were just advertising for city planners. They were a $100,000 salary, and I'm like, that's a good job, $100,000. Can't afford to buy a house in Toronto with a $100,000 salary. So the very people that live and work in designing our city can't afford to live in it. So we have a crisis, yes. And the government has a responsibility. And the fair thing is to simply go with the options for homes because nobody can afford that downstroke. And that's where we really need to be almost like homesteading. The government used to give people 160 acres of land. We need to give them 20% so they can afford to buy the house, and the government will be your partner and player. They'll constantly own 20% of the property you buy, right? You come with 5, they come with 20, you get a regular standard mortgage from the bank, and away you go, and you can afford to buy this house. And when you sell, the government gets their 20% back, plus they get 20% of the equity, because as we all know, nobody likes the government giving away stuff. So they're not giving it away, they're maintaining it, they're keeping it in people's hands. They're saying, we still own this building and the government can provide the land. We got land, we got beautiful land backing on the ravines all over the city that's reserved for the wealthiest of our people. Why aren't we building beautiful ravine view condominiums so people can buy them, so people who do the slugging and the trudging in the city afford to have a nice view? No, if you have a view of a ravine in this city, you're a multimillionaire. So what are we doing? But we're saying, no, we have to preserve those beautiful views for these rich people. But
Thank you. We're short on time, and I just want to get John David's last question here.
Do you know how some of the European countries deal with ridiculous house prices? England, for example, do you know what they do?
well, I'm assuming they do something different than we do.
They do. What they do in many cases is you don't buy the house, an insurance company buys the house. And you pay the insurance, life insurance, to the insurance company. You don't pay anything to the building. When you die, the insurance company pays off the house. So you're never buying the house, you're paying the insurance company for the insurance to pay off the house.
I'm sorry, I don't understand that concept because I think the main driver of this is that people own their own home, that people have that social feeling that they belong, that they're not a burden on society, that they're part of society. And that's why it's not just about having them own a house, it's the dignity and pride that gives someone to be a citizen and to have their piece of the land. And that's an important aspect in this that you all are missing. Excuse that, I had to throw that one in there. But you are, because people, you know, that line, give a guy a job and never has to work again, or that thing, you know, it's that same concept. You give someone a reason to live. You say, this is yours, right? This is yours. We're going to help you. We're going to help you succeed, right? And what you'll see is you'll have thousands of successful people in this thing, and all those social costs they were talking about earlier, about policing and all that, will start to disappear, right? And all the problems we have with our housing, with our social housing, will start to disappear as more and more people own homes, more and more people have a feeling of pride that they are Canadian and they belong to this land because the land belongs to them.
Thank you, Dane. So just a reminder, we do still have a few more slots open if you'd like to present an idea.
Hello. One thing that I would suggest for specifically schools in Toronto and Canada and abroad, in Japan, apparently, in some of their schools at least, they don't have janitors. They have kids that clean the school, and they take care and take pride in their facility, and that is a good way to instill, I would say, basically dignity in your space and the reality that you actually have to take care of things. And I would say in our culture, we have a very sheltered way of life where we, I guess, don't expose people to the reality of work, of economic conditions, working in a warehouse, working in a factory, working in whatever the case may be, until it's, magically like upon someone and they're just like, oh, okay, like I have no idea what I'm doing here, which is, a lot of teens, whatever, growing up don't know about mortgages, etc. I know now they're starting to introduce that kind of financial information to curriculum in schools. But when I was in high school, basically I remember a time where somehow, it just became trendy to leave all your cafeteria refuse on the tables. And basically the janitor would actually walk around and just clean up after all these kids, not cleaning, like mopping the floor, like actually taking chunks of garbage food and like physically carrying it to a garbage can. That to me is just ridiculous, I would say. And you could transfer somehow, however many, 2, 3, 4, whatever janitors are in a school, to teacher roles and say they are the teachers of cleaning, basically, and teach kids how to clean, make it a 1 hour course a week or who the heck knows, whatever, and do that so that they have a sense of, basically dignity, pride, etc. in the reality of what it takes to walk on a clean floor or, clean environments, etc. It gets that mentality going. And yeah, that's one thing I would say that I'll just leave it at that, basically.
Thank you. Questions, Tom?
And it would save money. That's the thing. So, somehow, some way. Sorry.
So what do you see the city's role in this idea being?
Somewhere in the city's role would be, whoever sits on the school boards, trustees, I don't know the technical term for that, they would approach some, teacher's curriculum guide, etc. And maybe, get the janitors who are there, teach them to become teachers, get them to learn whatever it is, communication skills to get these ideas and principles across and make it, a daily activity. You can go on YouTube or something like that. I'm pretty sure there's some kind of, I don't know, I saw, one of those inspirational videos somewhere on Facebook, and it's good. People need this, and there's something that's very in our society, we look down upon the basics, and the basics are what allows anyone to get to the top of anywhere, right? So we look down upon cleaners, etc. And no one's going to say that or admit that, but you can tell sometimes just by the look on people's faces, etc. And that's just ridiculous, I would say. So yeah, that would be the city's role, basically somehow school board contacting teachers associations, whatever, and then formulating some kind of plan to get that all taken care of. And yeah, hopefully saving money, etc., time, labor, volunteer hours, all that kind of thing. So
Thank you. John David?
Do you have any idea about how we would deal with the union that represents the cleaners?
I have no clue, but basically, maybe if the courses are set up as volunteer hours or something to that effect, it might not intervene with anything of that sort. But yeah, that definitely is somehow, if people were to get laid off or something because of this, that would be tragic or whatever, and that's not what I would intend. But somewhere there must be some efficiencies to be made, money saving costs potentially for the union themselves if they're not, I don't know, spending so much on certain things, etc. Yeah, somewhere along those lines.
Do we have any other questions? Nope. Thank you, Ian. So up next we have Lee Adamson, if you could take the mic.
Hello. My name is Lee Adamson, and I have actually three mini ideas that I wanted to present to you today. And they One of them just pertains to kind of the way the discussion about budget and budget spending seems to come up. As a resident of the city, it just seems like the discussion about how much taxes are going to go up seems to be the first thing that's discussed. And then later, when they're trying to allocate the budget, now you go, oh, we don't have enough revenue to pay for homeless shelters or trees for our parks or all of these things. And I just kind of think it's backwards. I think I would like to see presentation of the priority areas, the plans for the city that have vision and get people inspired by these visions and how awesome some of these projects are. And then have a discussion about how we're going to pay for them and will this require higher taxes or other revenue tools. Because then I kind of think of it as sort of walking into a store. I have my list and I know exactly what I'm going to buy. And I'm thinking, I'm not going to buy anything extra. But then when you start looking around and you go, oh my goodness, that's an awfully good deal and such an awesome thing, I kind of think maybe I will part with a little more money today than I had in mind. And I sort of think the same thing could happen with the budget, that if people in Toronto knew what the awesome plans were, they'd be more willing to say, sure, I'll pay an extra $10 a month or $1 a year or whatever. Some of these plans actually aren't that expensive when you break it down on a per person level. So that's sort of one idea, is to try to get us enticed into awesome things before we start to discuss revenue tools. So that's one idea. Did you want me to do all three?
Yeah, please. You have 2 more minutes.
Okay. So the second one is sort of related to that, and that's it's called participatory budgeting. So it's sort of a people's choice thing. And I thought it would be nice if we could allocate a small amount of the budget, like 1% or maybe 0.5%. And it would be an opportunity for all of the different priority plans to be presented in a very, probably grouped into categories, environment or equity or whatever. And then people could say, for me, my choice, I'm going to spend 1% of my budget. I would like it to go to this, because this is my personal priority area, whether it's transit or housing. And that way it would also provide information for me, because I now have to select, well, what is it the city wants to fund? So I learn what are the things, and then I get to choose where I want my small amount of my taxes to go. And then the third one was a sort of a triple bottom line approach. I'd sort of like to see every funding decision not just be about money, but also be about fairness and equity, and also about the environment. So I think for every funding decision, I would like to see the impact on not just money, but these other things as well.
Thank you. We'll open it up to John David, please.
What do you think about how many people in homeless shelters vote for the councillors?
Probably not very many, but how many people walk by people who are homeless and feel sorry and feel bad that we have such a rich city that allows people to freeze on the streets?
Yes, I mean, you're quite right about that, but it always bothers me about political folks that in the back of their mind, they can talk about these altruistic things, but their basic job is to get elected again the next time.
Well, I think that's one of the things about the participatory voting on priorities, that they may be surprised. They may be surprised that the top priority isn't transit. It may be homelessness. That may be what's really bothering people. And I think if they know that from the participatory voting, it could influence the decisions that they make in council.
So it would be a good idea, for instance, if I thought my councillor's spending on homelessness was important, that I let him know or her know that that's important to me, and it's important whether I vote for you the next time as to whether you're going to do this. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
We have a question from Riley.
So at the Toronto Youth Cabinet, we're pretty big fans of participatory budgeting, and I just wanted to, you kind of talked about having different categories like housing, transit. Would you be open to having, like, just hypothetically, like a percentage of the budget be towards like a youth-only participatory budgeting program?
Meaning youth only would vote for it, or
like be involved in the decision-making process for their percentage kind of thing?
well, I think every voter should have the ability to decide on where their little bit of taxes go. So
Okay.
a youth person who votes would make that same decision.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Adina?
So I just wanted to get clarification. When we pay our taxes, there are like 10 boxes you check. You put 1, 2, 3, 4 into your priorities. So it all comes to City Hall so that they know what the voters of the City of Toronto are prioritizing.
Yeah, that would be an idea. I'd like to see an online thing as well, because a person may, like, it isn't a very attractive box, if you like, to say an equity box. You think, well, what the heck's equity? But to be able to go online and maybe drill down and see, well, what are the programs that I would be supporting if I tick that box? But it does, in the end, have to be simple enough. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
Up next, we will have Dawn DeCruz.
Hi, I'm Dane Grgas, and my idea is a couple of ideas, and it's short and sweet. It's just 2 little ideas, and I have a catchy name, and it is, the first idea is Toronto Blue Water Free, and the second idea is Toronto only electric cars by a certain target date, but I didn't pick a date. So my ideas are about a clean environment. When I was traveling, I was coming out of Toronto, and it was maybe 10 years ago, and I was just coming into the city, and I was like quite far away, and it was in the summertime, and I saw this massive cloud of smog over the city, and I thought, oh my God, that's where I'm living. So this is about a clean environment. First of all, Paris is blue water free, and they were last spring, which means they have no longer any plastic water bottles, and Toronto can do that. And the questions about describing your idea, how will it benefit, who's responsible, money, and so on, I have no clue. But if you go to Paris and ask them how they did it, I don't know how they did it because I didn't Google them, but you wanted ideas. So that's my idea, is Toronto blue water free. No more plastic water bottles. Second thing, sorry. My best friends are plastic water bottles. And the other idea is Netherlands are having no gas cars by 2025. They will have all electric cars, motorcycles, trains, buses, scooters, and more bicycles and walking. And they will have electrical charge stations like we have gas stations. That's the idea. That's it.
Thank you. John David, did you have a question?
I think the electric car is a great idea. I have a street where there are 6 of them, and when they plug in, we get a brownout on the street.
Oh no!
The moment all 6 of them plug their cars in for recharge, because our electrical system is not built to handle them, and and it's a great idea. I think they should all be electric. But we have a problem with our electrical system and our ability to charge the cars.
The hydro.
Do we have any other questions? Nope. Thank you so much. Oh, Tom.
Sorry. What other partners do you think we'd need to have on board?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
What other partners do you think we'd have to have on board in order to make this truly effective and not maybe like lose people because they don't want to give up their car?
Well, first of all would be hydro, to change the way hydro system works. That would be one partner. You'd have to partner with the city to have, like, instead of gas stations, have electrical stations. So you'd need gas companies, like buildings and people in charge of gas companies. You'd need to get their permission or build ones instead of the gas, because they're going to be upset, right? So you'd need to educate the public, first of all. First, you need to educate and make people aware of the impact on the environment, and which is happening, but it's slowly happening. But so that's two, but I'm not sure.
John David?
This morning I went to buy groceries at our local Longo's, and I noticed there were 19 spots with no cars in them. All of those spots were for recharging your electric car. And what that meant was, I asked the manager, they put in the store and they pay for the electricity. So another partner could be major stores in their parking lots, because I was quite impressed. And there are 3 or 4 hotels in Ottawa, and they all have multiple car, and they're paid for by the hotel, not by the province or the city of Ottawa. So those are partners that are being used already and can probably be exploited some more.
And it could be other places, because I was at Morenci Falls in Quebec near the St. Lawrence River, and they had a charge station right there in the visitors' parking lot, in the parking lot for...
And hopefully the power for this parking came off on Morenci Falls.
That'd be great.
Awesome. I think that's all the questions. Thank you, Dawn.
Okay.
Up next, we have Sean Misher. Do we have Sean?
Where's Sean?
Sean
Mahar.
Mahar?
Sorry. I thought I was on later. Hi, my name's Sean Mahar. I work at the Social Planning Council. I have one sort of mediocre idea. The problems that we face are big. There's not a single thing that's going to fix them all. But one of the things that might be useful is to actually understand them well. So my, not big, but maybe medium-sized idea is, let's report on our budget in a way that reflects what we said we were going to do. We do that in our capital budget. Our capital budget is, notorious right now for including $33 billion worth of unfunded capital projects that Council is committed to. Our operating budget reports what we did last year and inflation. It doesn't report what the cost of fulfilling the poverty reduction strategy would be. It doesn't report what the cost of fulfilling the Housing Opportunities Toronto plan would be, or the child care plan, or the youth strategy, or the senior strategy, or any of the 22 separate strategies the city's adopted. What Council should look at when it decides on the operating budget is, what would it cost to meet the incremental requirements of all of those strategies that Council is committed to. If we committed to, as we did in the Housing Opportunities Toronto strategy, building 100,000 units over 10 years, did we build 10,000 units last year? And what's the cost of building 10,000 this year? And what's the incremental tax implication of achieving that goal? If we're going to meet our goals on the childcare strategy, which is wiping out the 17,000 people who are on waiting lists for affordable childcare, then we'd have to produce about 900 subsidies a year. What's the cost of that? And are we meeting that goal? And if we've fallen behind, what's the cost of catching up? That should be what's in the operating budget when we start. And then council should be looking at what it costs to meet those goals and making choices about either retreating from those strategies publicly and clearly and honestly, or raising the revenues that they need to fulfill those strategies publicly and clearly and honestly. Because the first part of solving a problem is understanding that you have a problem, and we tend to pretend that we don't. That we can continue to do essentially what we did last year while simultaneously having promised to do a whole lot better, recognizing that we need to, and never confronting the gap between the two.
So what do you think we need to do in order to get to that place where the operating budget just includes that incremental funding adjustments? Those adjustments.
Yeah, so there's a couple of steps, and one is some of those strategies are really quite clear about what the targets are, and they're readily costable. It is not all that tricky, though we've never actually done it, to look at Housing Opportunities Toronto and figure out what does it cost to build the number of units we'd have to build over the time period that we said, and put that into each year's budget as an incremental cost. Others are not as clear. There are some strategies that we've adopted that say things like, no one in Toronto should have to live in a shelter, but we haven't really costed what that would be. Or people should have access to affordable transit, but we've never really quite described what affordable means and what the incremental cost is of lowering ticket prices or MetroPass prices to meet what they need. So we do have to do a little bit of target setting that corresponds to the commitments that we've made. Sometimes they aren't numerical, and so they're hard to cost. We have to then do the costing, and we have to make a commitment to budgeting in accordance with those costings.
So that seems like a very logical and practical idea. How come it has not been done?
I think there are two problems. One is the things I just described are real work. I mean, it's not something that I could do this week. It's something that city staff would have to spend some real time on, and some of those are tricky. Some of those commitments are vague enough that you'd have to do a little bit of work to determine a real numerical value. The other is that it creates a political problem, because it is one thing to say that we should have a senior strategy that really supports seniors in our city. It's another thing to make a concrete numerical commitment to meeting that goal, because then you either have to raise the revenue or not do it, and that's awkward politically. The system we have now is easier for politicians and harder on the rest of us. I think it's incumbent on our elected officials to reverse that relationship.
Go ahead, John David.
Affordable childcare. This problem was solved 25 years ago.
And
it was stopped by the boards of education. Mm-hmm. There was a program written up and people trained to put childcare in the high schools as part of the training courses, because a lot of people leave high school to become parents and they never get any training in looking after the children. Yeah. And the boards actually paid for people to go to the Institute of Child Care at the University of Toronto. Mm-hmm. And when they came back, the board said, oh, we're not going to do that. Mm-hmm. So the city had a good idea, mm-hmm. but the boards of education, they can't control, really. Mm-hmm. And they stopped that. So the reason we have a problem now is a failure between the city and boards of education. It's just one of the big mysteries in my life experience.
And I think that there are always windows of opportunity that are better and worse for solving various kinds of problems, and that was one of the times when it was worse. This is one of the times when it's better, because the problem that the Toronto District School Board and the Toronto District Catholic School Board have is they have buildings that they want to keep and they can't justify keeping them, and providing childcare in them would be a terrific justification, but they don't have the operating dollars to make that work. So the interests in those relationships have reversed recently, and that creates an ideal opportunity to tackle that problem if we want to put the dollars in.
Good point. Thank you.
Any other questions? Nope. Thank you so much, Sean.
nutshell, the great idea I have, it's an old one. It's about using the Bank of Canada to create interest-free infrastructure loans. If we're building a transit system for $1 billion and we borrow money from the private banks, we end up needing to pay the private banks back plus interest. And in effect, what we are saying is that $1 billion that went towards the transit is not ours till we pay back the private banks. Now, if we were to fund that $1 billion worth of transit by using the Bank of Canada, our public bank, we pay ourselves back, and we don't have to even be paying ourselves interest. If you take a look at the amount of interest and compound interest that we have even in the City of Toronto budget right now, it's a substantial amount of money. And so that would be a way to be able to get funding instead of having to go into austerity and implode our infrastructure and have more homeless people on the streets. And this would also be able to be done from a federal perspective, because it's the Bank of Canada, and we would need to be cooperating with other levels of government. A proposal of, for example, homelessness. It's cheaper to house people. This was found in Medicine Hat. They took people off the street and gave them affordable housing, and it was actually cheaper for them to do that because they weren't paying for extra incarceration costs, healthcare costs, and just all the social costs that come from having people homeless. So if we were going to be taking a look at cost savings using, say, an example such as homelessness, then in order to get the money to kickstart that, not only would we would be able to have that money funded publicly, pay ourselves back, but we would end up amortizing over a longer period of time, doing something that would be humane and that would actually be positive. And I don't know if I've used up all my time, but I can say more, but I'll leave it at that for now. I got lots more to say, but keep it simple.
Great, thank you. Did you want to start us off, John David?
The Bank of Canada is a great idea. I don't know how their legislation will allow that. So someone would have to look at, can they do that under their present charter? The second thing is, it's always important to remember in the back of your mind about homelessness or any cost that the city does not spend money on that would prevent healthcare costs. Those healthcare costs are not borne by the city. It's a way of transferring the cost to the province because they pay for the healthcare costs. So every street person you don't house who gets run over, gets sick, the cost of treating of those person is now transferred to the province. So it's always useful to remember that whatever the city doesn't do in terms of health prevention, the consequences don't end up in their pocketbook. They end up in the province's pocketbook. A point that always disturbs me considerably.
Well, externalizing costs, I mean, that's ongoing. A lot of industries that are subsidized by the government that are pushing austerity agenda, but at the same time will subsidize something like the tar sands, which uses anyways, I could go into the environmental aspect of that, but somebody else pays the cost down the road. And so instead of maybe having an economy that's based on competition and being leaner and meaner, why not have an economy that's based on cooperation, so that we take a look at how can we house, clothe, and feed one another without destroying the planet. As far as the Bank of Canada, I've read the Bank of Canada Act several times, and there are articles in that allow for the government to create interest-free infrastructure loans from the federal government, and there was also a lawsuit from the Committee of Monetary and Economic Reform by Rocco Gelati that went forward as a class action lawsuit to the Ontario Supreme Court, and I could get into details about that, but the legislation still exists on the books for that as an option.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Nope. Great. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. Up next, Amanda Donning, please.
Second time, I'm not as nervous. I didn't even know you could go a second time because I keep it real short. This is regarding real estate. I think that to ensure the collection of taxes, I think the government is owed their tax to run their operation. I think it should be illegal for land or housing to exchange hands without the knowledge and approval of the Canadian government. You know, we've heard the term, it takes one to know one, but it would be really shocking for an honest individual to understand the mind of a criminal. And unfortunately, the realtors and builders' greed and corruption and sidestepping the government has placed this country in a very precarious financial position. And I think that no exchange of land or real estate should take place without going through the Canada Customs Revenue Agency. That we have, we rely on FinTrack. I can't remember what FinTrack stands for, but, they're supposed to oversee money laundering and so forth. But I know and I've heard that it's a mess, that they're because there's been so much flipping and there's just not enough personnel to be able to oversee these things. And we operate on this 30 to 60 day closing. It doesn't have to be that way. It could be 30 days or it could be 6 months, however long it takes the CCRA to investigate every single transaction and, was the commission paid, who was it paid to, and to make sure that they get their due. I know that in the newspaper it said recently they're going to put another $500,000 into investigating where these monies go to, these offshore money, but I actually think in most part it's to do with the real estate industry and the foreign buyers and the money laundering in that case. And good for Kathleen Wynne for the 15% foreign tax. It's fantastic. However, how can we ensure that she's going to get her 15% each and every time? So I just think that the Real Estate Council of Ontario is a shameful organization. They're not even reactive. It would really blow your hair back if you could hear the stories of things that they're made aware of and they do nothing about. And we also should kind of step away from the pride of home ownership to be the be-all, end-all, like we did in the 50s. Sometimes buying a home really hinders a person's progress, a slave to their possessions. And, maybe it's something that you do 1 or 2 times in your life. It doesn't have to be a lifelong thing because, you can't always afford it and there is inflation. So.
Thank you. We'll have Tom kick us off with the questions.
So what do you see the city's role as in relation to, I think you said, the CRAs?
I'm not sure how it could happen or what kind of loopholes that you'd have to jump through, but if there's some way that you could pull back in the reins and take away the oversight of the Real Estate Council of Ontario and that the City of Toronto oversees to make sure that there's no more that it doesn't balloon and burst. We keep talking about it, the balloon bursting, and the balloon bursting means that interest rates go up and people have to sell their homes to pay the loans that they've taken out on the houses, and we didn't learn from the 2008 crisis. It's just craziness. So to stop that in its tracks, take away from the RICO their oversight, remove them, and if somehow we can involve the CCRA directly with every single transaction and get rid of FinTrack. I don't know how the city could do that, but I know it would be a city problem because in Toronto we keep talking about Toronto and Vancouver being the culprits of the increased real estate prices, and Richmond Hill was pinpointed the other day as having gone up like 200% or something like this, and so I don't know, but. Yeah.
John David?
Since our finance guru is sitting in the back row there, is it correct that vacant houses and properties do not have to pay tax? They do pay tax.
They pay the same tax rate.
Is it the same or is it different? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Apologies. Nahum Maan. We'll get it to the end.
Hey. So I called my idea Invest in Innovation. And basically looking at the city to allocate special funds that would go towards citizens and residents, creating ideas and solutions to tackle some of the problems that the city is trying to face. One of the things that I think is a direct correlation is what the Ontario government did with budget talks, where they kind of created a portal online, allowed people to present ideas and vote on them, and then there was special funding allocated towards investing that project. But I think that the city could actually go a little bit further and invest in those citizens, not just presenting the ideas, but executing them. And I think we saw that with the Open Data Book Club and Budgetpedia in the big room, on almost zero resources, created tools that the city previously presented that they were desiring or hoping to build. So I think the potential is there. I think that really Toronto is built on social innovation, social entrepreneurship, kind of like core economic drivers in the city. And we have communities like Civic Tech, who every month are presenting all kinds of amazing ideas. And it's about making the creative class more accessible to more people, not being sort of just an elite thing. And the last thing I would just leave at is they do this in Barcelona, where citizens are actually encouraged to support building apps or operating systems or information of things or Internet of Things applications, and really that comes through partnerships between the city and the academic education institutes in the city and the private sector.
Thank you. Tom?
So how would you envision the projects or ideas being chosen?
So I would envision using an online, like a digital platform, which is exactly what Budget Talks did in the Ontario government. And there's all kinds of solutions out there. Othello is a platform used by a lot of municipalities from Vancouver. So there are tools that would facilitate and allow for voting and commenting and that sort of thing.
Adina?
So I think your idea is terrific because we suffer from silos and we don't get a lot of cross-silo communication. So what you're suggesting is partnerships between different organizations, individuals, to somehow solve some of the challenges we have.
I think you nailed it. Like, we have students, people studying in our schools to innovate and create solutions that the city is actively asking for. So
like, in social housing, if there's hundreds of units with no budget to fix up and move people in, then, you hook up with the nonprofits and get people who know how to build to get in there and clean them up and refurbish them. What's the name of the organization that builds houses? Sorry? Homes First or that, and these people have never connected, so this is a connector thing.
Yep.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Other questions? Nope. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So since we still have time, I'm going to ask Peggy Mulder to please come up and present your idea.
Good afternoon. Actually, I didn't know this session was on, so I'm not really that much prepared. But my idea evolves out of community consultation and the fact that it's not legislated. It's a very important part of our democracy. We have speed limits, and they're all legislated. And community consultation also needs to be legislated to ensure that it's democratic, fair, and everyone can participate, and that it's open and inviting for people to participate. So how can you do this? Basically, I've used the New York City model of community boards. They have coterminality of services and community districts and community boards. I've included in here the history, and Jane Jacobs was a big influence in the creation of community boards in New York City in 1961, and I really think that that is the solution. We need to completely restructure government. We can reduce the size of council. We create community boards. For instance, this event here, how would the city communicate with everyone in the city? If you had 26 community boards, you send the notices to your community boards, and then that way you can reach entire communities. Communities would work with city government, even communicate with provincial and federal government, and vice versa through the community boards. And that's how communication would go back and forth, but it needs to be legislated, not informal like this, because too many people lose out. So I've drafted the legislation. It's based on the New York City legislation. I have here frequently asked questions, and so I'm going to leave this with the city.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Adina to kick off our question round.
Yeah. So is what you're saying, like we amalgamated all the burbs a while ago. You're saying that doesn't work, and what we have to do is go back to the little units that existed. Do they work better?
In a way, but not really. Yes and no. For instance, if this was structured according to provincial ridings, there's no need to have 46 or 50 wards. In New York City, they have 52 wards, and they have 8 million people. We only have 2.5 million people, going on 3 million people, but we're big enough that we need to compartmentalize. However, it can be compartmentalized at the provincial riding size, which would be 120,000 people. But if you have a community board, and then the role of the community board is to have committees. And so people have many different interests. Some people are interested in parks. Some people would be interested in daycare. There's too much going on. One person or a few people cannot cover all of the things. However, people have different interests. They won't come out for one, issue, high rise. But if the issue is daycare, they will come out for daycare. Or if they might be interested in parks or whatever they're interested in, traffic. So you can have whatever committees you like in your neighborhood to work on problems, make suggestions to city council. In New York City, they even have input into city budgets. You can prioritize budgeting items for your neighborhood, your community. But it does break it down, and that way we'd only need 26 councillors. And instead of executive committee sitting there and listening to 50 to 100 people speaking for 3 minutes, which is basically 3 minutes is not good for the person speaking, and it's not good for the councillor, and it takes up all day. If I was a councillor, I'd say, please go back as a community or as a group, write down, prioritize, tell me what your needs are, and give me one letter. I'd rather have one letter from a whole bunch of people saying this is number 1, number 2, number 3, than to sit there all day long listening to 50 people spend 3 minutes speaking. And also it gets the community together, to work together. We have to work together. The city is too big. The world is too big. And unless we work together, we're constantly off. If the word silos is correct, we can't get anywhere. We're doing it the hard way. So I think this, if it's legislated, it's fair, it's organized, and we can actually get somewhere.
We're going to have one more question from Tom.
So I have 2 quick questions. So these would be open to everyone and not making decisions, but making recommendations?
Right. City Council still makes the ultimate decision, but it's a way to get everybody to participate who wants to participate, and just to make everything more organized and make it easier for City Council with their time and easier for us. People need to talk to each other. Instead of, 60,000 or 100,000 people going to one councillor, we should talk amongst ourselves, write things down, prioritize, but it doesn't eliminate the option where somebody says, I can't work with this group of people, I want to talk to my councillor. Fine. That still works. So I just think it's more organized, it's more fair. Community boards are even funded. You have a manager because you need to take minutes of meetings. You need to have a website. You need to communicate. Again, the city can't communicate with 3 million people. But each community board, you can communicate with 120,000 people. It's a back and forth. I just think it's legislated to make sure it's fair, and it's organized. Right now, this is not organized.
Thank you. And did you want to leave to please fill out page 8 of your workbook and submit it to our 2 volunteers. Oh, that's fine. Thank you so much. Just fill out page 8 and leave it with our 2 volunteers at the sign-up desk, and they'll be collecting them for consideration. Thank you. Go ahead, Julian.
Hi, everyone. I've been in Toronto for several years. I grew up in Australia, and I have brought many visitors coming into the city. And one of the things that people have noticed is how the quality of life has been deteriorating in the last few years. One of the reasons is the lack of enforcement of some of the rules. And the rules are there. The problem is there is not enough officers to really enforce them. And we cannot enforce them is because there is no funding for them. Well, in Sydney, since the 80s, we have enforcement of many rules. And for, say, littering in a park is $200, Australian dollars. And we have people doing that. So it's something that is self-funding, but more than getting revenue out of that, is a way to really teach people to become good citizens. So Toronto is one of the biggest entry ports into Canada. The quality of life of a city really depends on the way we behave. So it's not so much on a building, on a highway or whatever, it's really on the way we behave. And if that behavior deteriorates because people don't know how to be good citizens, because they were not trained to be good citizens, then we need to have a way to really teach the people how to be, but without having to put that into the limited resources that we have in the city. So more taxes to pay for some officers to enforce something, where if we really put the fines will pay for those officers. So the idea is to have a way in which we have more officers enforcing the rules and paying for them based on those fines. That's pretty much that.
Thank you, Tom.
So that would be increasing the fines to a point where like all enforcement is self-funded.
Enforcing
right?
them, because maybe they are there, but they are not being enforced because we don't have enough officers to enforce them. So I see a gap. Like, okay, an example. I went to, a person was visiting me, and the person is the second time that comes to visit me. And we went to a park that we like. It's Leslie and something, I don't remember the name. And there were cars all over the place, in places that they should not park. There were people doing all kinds of things in the park that are not allowed, but no one is there enforcing them. So slowly, you see the deterioration of the city, or the quality of life in the city, because we are not enforcing the rules. And we don't enforce the rules is because probably there is no budget to have more officers to do it. But if we make sure that there is a correlation between enforcing the rules and paying for those officers, I think that we don't have, is a way to keep the revenue that we have. I mean, without having to increase the revenue for that, we self-sustain that from the fine, but also we make sure that that is going to be good for the rest of not only Toronto, but to any place they move in the future, the people that are coming without those way. So,
any other questions? No. Thank you so much, Julian.
All right, no problem.